Hello, I'm Julia Fisher. Welcome to the first edition of The Olive Tree, the programme that asks the question, what is God doing in Israel and the Palestinian areas today? With so much bad news coming out of the region, you might think it's a hopeless cause. But the aim of these programmes is to bring you news from both Jewish believers and Palestinian Christians. We'll be hearing from them firsthand as they share their stories and explain the scriptures to help us understand what God is doing there and how we can be involved. In my frequent travels to Israel and the West Bank, I've met many believers there, both Jews and Arabs. It's a complex region dominated by politics, conflict and uncertainty. Under the glare of the world's media, two groups of hurting people share a small country the size of Wales. Much of the reporting we hear is biased towards one side or the other. But on this programme, you'll hear good news from both sides. In fact, you'll hear stories of reconciliation that will amaze you. These stories are not widely known as yet. I've been following the progress of a grassroots movement that has been gaining momentum as the number of believers in the Holy Land has been growing. Despite regular conflict in the region resulting in physical walls of separation, there is a body of people united in a common faith in Jesus who are bucking the trend. People who are living proof of those verses in Ephesians chapter 2, where the Apostle Paul describes that the only way for Jews and non-Jews to be truly reconciled to each other and live in peace is through the cross. Perhaps the most difficult place for this to happen today is in the Holy Land, but happening it is, and in greater and greater numbers. Recently, I met Evan Thomas. From a Jewish family, he was born in New Zealand. Today, he's pastor of a congregation in Israel in a town called Netanya. Situated just north of Tel Aviv, Netanya is in the narrowest part of Israel, between the coast and the West Bank, and in recent years experienced several attacks from suicide bombers who infiltrated the city, killing many and maiming more. So you might find it surprising that Evan Thomas has a great deal of sympathy for Palestinian people. I asked him how this could be.
Well, that's a huge story in itself and really goes back to the days when I was serving in the IDF in the first Intifada, and the Lord really moving upon my heart during a particularly difficult tour of duty in the center of Gaza City back in winter of 88, 89. And coming back from that very, very troubled, myself and my other comrades for that matter, for the kind of work that we do. I was trained as a soldier, suddenly being thrust into the civil duties of a civilian population and so on. The methodologies that we use that we won't go into here, but it was very, very hard on us. At about that time, a very dear colleague and friend, Dr. Salim Munaya, some of you may have heard of him or meet with him, the director of the Musalacha Ministries, approached me and shared his heart of a vision he had to develop a ministry of reconciliation that would bring the Israeli Messianic Jewish community together with the Palestinian Christian community. We begin to see ourselves as the two main parts of the indigenous, local, believing followers of Jesus, followers of Yeshua community here in the land. Took me about 30 seconds to give him a positive answer that I was on board with him. And we've worked side by side since then. And through it, God developed a tremendous love and burden in my heart for the Palestinian community, not just the Palestinian Christian community. That was the first step, discovering, my neighbor and such a totally different world, and particularly when you step into the West Bank, and to discover their worship life, what it means in their context. I spoke about a context of conflict and hostility that we grow up in. Theirs is a context of conflict and occupation, and all that goes with that. I mean, It's very important, I think, for Christians worldwide who have a focus on the land to make it their business to find out what makes their Palestinian Christians, brothers and sisters, what makes their hearts tick. What is their life all about? What does it mean to grow up generations in occupation? What does it mean to have that struggle, that enormous tension of trying to come to terms with, the Jewish people as God's chosen people with a particular purpose, who are also the people who are your oppressors, and sometimes very unjustly. And we as Israeli Messianic believers have to deal with that issue, to deal with the issue of God's promise to us and the land and all of these things, and yet how are we to deal with the stranger in the land, who has been here many, many more generations than most of us. And so it's quite common for me to know Palestinian Christian believers who can very easily trace 7 generations of heritage here and more in the land, where some of us are struggling to I'm a first generation returnee. To understand their heart, their pain, their pressures, to learn to love, to worship with them in Hebrew and in Arabic, to hear them and understand what makes them tick in respect of their identity as Palestinian Christians vis-a-vis my identity emphases as a Messianic Jewish Israeli, and how much they cherish the power of the cross, for example, where so much of our identity is tied up in the prophetic word in terms, or the restoration passages of bringing us back to the land, and so trying to marry those two concepts is enormous. And how do I deal with sending my young men and women off to the IDF, who may be very much the instruments of their difficulty or oppression? What does it mean for a Palestinian who to come and visit me even for a day? God forbid he stay overnight, but to come visit me for a day from the West Bank and take 3 months to get a permit to cross the checkpoint to come through into Jerusalem, you see? And then when he does that with his family, to go through all the indignity that he may very easily suffer at those checkpoints. So again, in these words, what I'm trying to describe to you is that the sense of, needing to grow, to allow God to grow in you a sympathy, a compassion, an understanding, and a sense of your unique unity in this conflict thing. It's not an accident. So when we look at passages like Paul's letter to Ephesians chapter 2 that speaks about the one new man, and the breaking down the middle wall of partition, which is the whole context of that was Jew and Gentile in Paul's letter. Here it's a total reality for us when we talk about bringing Palestinian and Israelis together. 2 weeks' time, we will have our biannual pastors' retreat, and we will be meeting in the Galilee at Kibbutz Ma'agan, right on the Kinneret. And for the last 4, nearly 5 years, we've been meeting as a combined group. So Palestinian Christian pastors, so we'll have Pastor Nihad will be there from Bethlehem, and God willing, Musa Abu Ali, and many others that will be with us together and helping us to develop that understanding that the indigenous body of the land is made up not just of Messianic Jewish people and Gentiles that intermarried into our community, but is made up of the Arab Christian community as well.
Evan Thomas, one of the pastors of Beit Asaph, a Messianic Jewish congregation in Netanya, situated on the Mediterranean coast, just north of Tel Aviv in Israel. You're listening to The Olive Tree with me, Julia Fisher, the programme that brings you up-to-date news from both Arab and Jewish believers living in Israel and the West Bank today. If, having listened to Evan, you would like to help in some way, then let me tell you about the Olive Tree Reconciliation Fund, a small registered charity based in the UK, whose vision it is to build bridges of understanding and support in a spirit of reconciliation between believers in the Holy Land and Christians worldwide. For many years I've been travelling to Israel and the West Bank regularly for my work as a writer and broadcaster, and more recently as a tour leader. In an effort to try and understand the complexity of Israel, at the back of my mind there has always been one question: what is God doing there? In looking for answers to this simple question, I've been drawn towards people like Evan, people who are reconcilers, Jews and Palestinians who understand their Bibles and enjoy fellowship together, often at great cost. There's enormous need amongst these people, and the Olive Tree Reconciliation Fund is continually identifying these needs and making them known to Christians in the nations. We want to stand by our brothers and sisters there and show we care by sending financial and practical support and by visiting them as often as we can. If you would like to receive regular information about the work of the Olive Tree Reconciliation Fund, then please get in touch. You can visit our website, www.olivetreefund.org, or email inquiries@olivetreefund.org, or write to me, Julia Fisher, the Olive Tree Reconciliation Fund, P.O. Box 850, Horsham, RH12 9GA. I look forward to hearing from you. That's all we've time for today. Join me at the same time next week for more news from the Olive Tree. Until then, goodbye.